Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning. Dove, when's your next father-daughter duet?
Sorry?
When's the next
Uh,
duet?
we're working on it. Not sure yet.
Okay. I'll look for it on Facebook.
Okay.
Good morning.
We always had the same issue.
Good morning. Good morning.
We have different taste in music. She likes a certain type of music. I like a different type of music. So it's that's the most challenging part, coming to consensus as to choose when we choose the songs.
Well, I'll tell you, it's the most wonderful way to bond with a child, and I wish I could do it with my kids. I think I'm almost like jealous that you're doing this with your daughter. You should look for. I was speaking with Dove. You should look for some of his duets that he does with his daughter, musical duets, where he plays guitar and sings, and his daughter sings. It's really beautiful. He's got a
Thank you.
few on Facebook. Okay, I think we should get started. I got to bring up the Imrei Yaakov. Just give me 1 second. Okay. All right. So let me share the screen. Before we go back into the text of the Imrei Yaakov, I just wanted to take a look at a halacha in Shulchan Aruch. So let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat Siman Reish Ayin, or they call it Siman Ayin Reish, because the word Reish Ayin spells out the word Ra, and you don't want to say anything bad. So many times you'll see the letters of a siman like this transposed. They'll call it siman ayin reish, sif aleph, so that it doesn't spell out the word ra. Anyway, this section of Choshen Mishpat is something that we will get to in more detail. It's called Hilchos Haveda Umetzia, laws of lost objects and finding lost objects, when you're allowed to pick up an object that you find off the street, and when there's an obligation of Hashavas Aveda. Here, the Shulchan Aruch is discussing a situation where you find something that's totally hefker. It has no simanim, it has no recognizable signs that can be identified, and therefore you're allowed to keep it. And what the Shulchan Aruch is dealing with here in Siman Reish Ayin is what happens if a child finds something from hefker. Does the child get to keep it or not? So, mitzias cheresh shaita v'katan ein bo mishum gezo. That if a child or someone who is mentally disabled, meaning cheresh was a deaf mute in the times of the Gemara, a deaf mute because they didn't have the technology yet for deaf mutes to communicate with the public. They were deemed to be mentally incapacitated because of their inability to interact socially with others. That's no longer the halacha, by the way, but we'll just say for intensive purposes, a minor or a person who has mental incapacity, if they find an object, since they don't have the mental capacity to properly acquire something from hefker, as we talked about yesterday, if you were to take that object after they found it, it sounds very cruel, and it is. Let's say a child finds a dollar bill on the road, a $5 bill on the road. And you go over to that child and say, well, halachically, you don't have sufficient das, you don't have sufficient mental capacity to be kind of that. So you give that to me, and you grab it from his hands. Technically, you're not liable for gezel, for theft. However, Ella mipnei darkei shalom, but the rabbi stepped in that situation, and they said that we need to keep the peace. This is going to create social unrest. And in order to avoid social unrest and strife among people, we have to step in. I wish there were more rabbis who stepped in to stop social strife today and what's going on in the U.S. But anyway, lefichach avar echad v'gazla miyadam eina yotza b'dayanim. But what are the ramifications of the fact that it's not an issue of theft? It's rather an issue of darkei shalom, of preserving the peace. If an adult went ahead and did b'di'evid, grab that $5 bill out of that child's hands, there is no legal recourse against the adult. The father of that child can't take that adult to Beis Din. And the Rama then says, Haga, V'davka mitzia she'ein das acheres maknalo. But that's only when it comes to a child finding lost objects, where he's trying to acquire something from hefker. And in that situation, we say that since there's no third party, which is a party of sentience, of consciousness, of intellect, who is gifting the object to the minor cannot legitimately acquire it according to Torah law. However, let's say a minor performed some work product for an employer and the employer paid him. In that situation, the child has legally acquired that payment even midioraisa. So therefore, if an adult would come along and say to the child who just earned $5 for taking out someone's garbage or mowing his lawn, an adult would come along and say, give that to me, you're just a minor, and he would take away that money, that is actionable even in a Beis Din. Okay? So that's the distinction. In the first case, there was no adult intellect that was transacting with the minor. And therefore, since the minor is the only party who's trying to create the transaction so that he acquires the $5 bill, he doesn't have the mental capacity to do so. And it's only because of darkei shalom that we grant it to him. But in the second case, where there's an adult who is giving the child the money, the child legally acquires the money even according to the Torah. So that's Sif Aleph, that's the first halacha. The second halacha talks about what a child's obligation is to a parent when the child finds a lost object. And you'll be a little bit surprised by this halacha, and you may even be happy about this halacha, and I'll explain why. Mitzias beno ubito hasmuchim al shulchano. The Shulchan Aruch now says that if a son or daughter who live in your house find an object, okay, afal pi shehem gedolim, even though they are already adults, even if you have adult children living in your house, and they come home one day and they say, Dad, look what I just found on the street, a $20 bill. Umitzias bito hanaira afal pi she'ena smucha al shulchano. And also the same could be true of a 12-year-old daughter who's technically has the status of an adult, even if she's not a dependent. Umitzias abdo b'shivchaso haknanim. And if one of your servants who's not Jewish finds a lost object, umetzias ishto, and if your wife finds a lost object, in all of those cases, harei elu shalo, they all belong to the man of the house. Now, I'm not going to get into your 12-year-old daughter. I'm not going to get into your servant because that's not relevant in today's world. And right now, we're not going to get into whatever your wife acquires technically belongs to you if she acquires it from Hefker. I'll leave those aside for now. I just want to discuss the first case, that even if your adult child who is living in your house finds a lost object, you are entitled to that. that they must surrender that $20 bill to you. Now, what's the reason? So this is fascinating. The Sma says, who was a student of the Ramah, he writes the reason, and he wrote the famous commentaries Drisha and Prisha on the tour, is the Sma. Okay, and he writes the reason as follows. He says, Ayin Drisha shekasafti hatam. I refer you to my commentary on the tour where I wrote the reason as follows. Shekach hayanira yashar lachachamim l'shalem hatov la'osa im otov. That the rabbis felt that it was only fair to compensate a father who was supporting a child who is an adult by creating some kind of compensation to a parent who's supporting a child who's an adult already, and basically saying that whatever the adult child finds from Hefker belongs, we award to the father. This is purely rabbinic law, because as we know, a dependent child who's an adult, an 18-year-old teenager, is legally an adult. You would think anything he finds on the street belongs to him. Not so fast, said Chazal. Chazal said that kid is living in your house. He's eating your food. He's benefiting from you. You deserve compensation for that. You deserve that the child has to at least show you some level of appreciation. And the appreciation that we legislate that he must show you is that he must surrender to you anything that he finds from Hefker. Shemezin oso, afal pi sheinu chayiv lefarnaso ki im ad vav shanim. He says, because by as a parent feeding my child, I am doing something that I am not obligated to do according to halacha. What is the age where a child ages out of a parent's obligation to feed the child? It's unbelievable. The rabbis tell us that a child becomes of age once he's 6. By his 6th birthday, that child is now receiving chesed from a parent if the parent feeds and clothes and lets the child live in his house. Just to show you, I mean, it's mind-boggling, but just to show you how standards have changed since the ancient and medieval world. I mean, this is being written in the 16th century. 16th century, a kid is 6 years old. The father technically has a right to tell the child, listen, my boychik, it's a tiny little house, and we have a lot of mouths to feed. You have 4 younger siblings. I'm going to need you to go out and work now in order for you to be able to eat. A parent has a legal right to do that, and that did occur. It's not just like it's legally, it was because of practical concerns. And so, but there was also a recognition that quite often a parent, out of the goodness of their heart, would allow an already an old 6-year-old kid to stay in the house and to eat the food at the Shabbos table. And so they said, well, since you out of the goodness of your heart are taking care of this 6-year-old, out of appreciation for that, the child must surrender anything he finds from Hefker. Now,
what if that child?
What's that? I didn't hear you, Izzy.
Sorry, what if that child's paying rent?
So if the child is paying rent, so then you're not entitled to their mitzvah. It's hasmuchim al shulchano. They're dependents of yours. If you're providing for them, if you're not providing for them because they're paying you rent, so there's a quid pro quo. The only argument that you could make is if you're charging them less than what they would normally have to pay for room and board. So then you could make that argument, but that would have to be something that would have to be assessed properly. Okay? But then the Shulchan Aruch goes further. And I just want to skip a little bit in the Shulchan Aruch. Aval, he says, the Mechaber continues and he says, Mitzias beno, she'eno samuch al shulchano, afal pi shuhu katan. But if a child finds something and that child is not a dependent on their parent, even if the child is a minor, or if you have a servant who's Jewish, or or if you have a wife that you're separated from, and we're not going to get into the details of that technical halacha of the status of a woman who's divorced and not divorced, eina shelo, you're not entitled to those lost objects. Going back to the case of a child, if the child is financially independent of the parent, even if the child is under bar mitzvah, they are entitled to keep their mitzvah. Cannot be coerced to surrender that lost object that they found over to their parent. Okay? Now, v'im nasnu matana lekatan, this is the Ramah. And the Ramah comes in and he says, if an adult gave a gift to a minor, hasamuch al shulchan aviv, and that minor is a dependent of his parent, harei hi shel aviv, then that gift belongs to the parent. Now, why is that? So that's a big machlokes that we're going to see shortly, why that halacha holds true. But then the Ramah says, avalo bivno hagadol. But if an adult gives a gift to one of my adult children, then the child does not have to surrender that to the parent. Okay, and the question is, why is that? And the Sma over here says as well, I'll just bring it up, Di'ika lememar hanosein hikbid lios dafka shel haben. Because in that situation where the adult gave the gift to my adult child, the argument could be made that the adult only wanted it to belong to the child. Now, when I say an adult child, you understand what I mean? I'm not talking about a 20-year-old. I'm talking about a 13-year-old. So if my kid turns bar mitzvah and an adult gives that child a gift, the parent has no rights to that gift. Parent can't say, I demand that you give me that money so that we can put it into your university fund, right? Technically, a parent doesn't have a right to say that. Now, a parent could play a little poker, have a little poker face with the child and say, now, son, they gave it to you so that we can invest your money. So let me open up a bank account for you and we'll save it for your university fund. But if you have a sharp kid who knows halacha and he knows how to pull up siman reish ayin in Choshen Mishpat, and he can show you black and white the halacha that says that now that I am legally an adult, I'm 13 years old, even though I'm still a dependent of yours, you have no right to dictate to me how I should use those funds because they were given to me by an adult. And the argument could be made that the adult specifically wanted me to be in control of those funds, not you. Masha ein kain b'nasan livno hakatan. But he says, and that's the difference between a minor child and an adult child. When the child is still a minor under bar mitzvah, the argument that the father has control over that gift, even when an adult gave it, is the mistama eno mishumar biyado zulas das aviv hashomro, the nasno lakatan adaita de avuha. We can assume that the adult gave it to the child with the understanding that the parent was going to be in control of those assets, because the adult knows that the child does not have sufficient responsibility intellectually to be able to protect that money. But once the child becomes of age, once the child becomes legally an adult at bar mitzvah, the adult's gift should be respected as being the property of the child, and a parent does not have the legal right to demand that the child surrender that money to the parent. Okay?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I seem to recall many years ago, sometimes what would happen is when the child had his bar mitzvah and maybe the bar mitzvah, the family didn't have the sum of money, a lot of money. So the father would take some of the financial parts of the gifts to help pay for the bar mitzvah. So would there be some issues there?
I think there are definitely issues. The father has to consult with the child and say, listen, son, I'm paying $5,000 for your bar mitzvah. Are you okay with that? If I take some of the cost of the bar mitzvah and take it out of your bar mitzvah gift so that you'll help pay for it as well? And if the child says, okay, then that's one thing. But if the child was never consulted, or if the child says, no, I'm not interested, I'd rather keep the gifts and not have a big party. So I think that's a very serious halachic problem. I think that, many times parents make a simcha for themselves, not for their kid. If you make a bar mitzvah and you invite all of your adult guests and you let your son have 25 of his friends in his class, so then that $5,000 went primarily to feeding your guests, not to feeding the kids in your child's class who got the kids meal, which costs half the amount of the adult meal. I mean, I know these things because I know the catering business from being a rabbi at a shul that does catering. So you've paid a lot more money, not for your son and for his friends, you've paid a lot more money for your friends. For you now to go ahead and turn around and say, well, we're going to take some of your gifts, you've actually stolen from your son. He's halachically an adult. The checks were made out to him, and you don't have a right to take that away from him. It's only if he's a minor, if he received those gifts before he became bar mitzvah, then we could argue that you have a right, because we can assume that the adult who gifted it to the child wanted the parent to be in charge of those finances, but not once the child is bar mitzvah. You can't make that assumption.
Actually, I was just going to ask that question, which sounded like splitting hairs, but that's what we do halakhically. So if the gifts were delivered to the son before he reached the age of 13, that would be a different story than had they arrived after he was 13.
Yeah, I think so. Now, could there be an argument to be made that in today's society, maybe children are not considered to have come of age until they're older? I'm not sure if that argument would hold water halachically. I haven't seen that, but I seem to recall vaguely that there are those who wish to make that argument, but I'd have to I don't remember where I would know to look that up. But based on the black and white words of the Shulchan Aruch, the cutoff date is the age of 13 for a boy, the age of 12 for a girl. A parent doesn't have a right to start taking their child's finances once they receive gifts after bar or bat mitzvah. The only issue that we said is if the child finds something on the street or acquires something from Hefker, there we say that a parent, even for a child over bar mitzvah, a parent does have a right to demand the child surrender it to them. And that's in compensation to the parent for taking care of their adult children, even though they're not obligated to halachically, okay?
Rabbi, one more nuanced question. If the gifter gives a check payable to the parents, is that a gift to the child or is that a gift to the parents?
Then that's a gift to the parents. Unless the adult says explicitly in the card, this is for your son, but I didn't know if he had his own bank account, so I made the check out to you. Please give this to your son. Then it's clear that the gift is meant for the child. Excuse me. So anyway, so interesting stuff, huh? So Ron, I see you're speaking to your lovely wife who's off screen. You better make sure that you call your kids right after shir this morning and make sure that you don't owe them a big lump of cash.
It's okay. I wasn't involved with that, but I know others that were.
Okay. All right. So let's go. Now we have to go into the Imrei Yaakov. So I'll stop this screen share and I'll bring up the text of the Imrei Yaakov. Okay. So let us continue in the text itself. Okay. So we saw Sifkat and Nun Aleph yesterday, and now the Imrei Yaakov says that if you give a gift to a minor that has at least cognizance. So let me be clear. We're dealing with multiple categories. One is we're dealing with, yesterday we saw a distinction being drawn in halacha between two kinds of minors. One is a minor who's a toddler, who doesn't even have the ability to know the difference between an object of value to an object of no value. And there the Rav Shulchan Aruch said that even if an adult gifts something to a child who has so little cognizance, like a toddler, that he can't even know the difference between an object of value or of no value, then the child doesn't acquire that even when an adult gives it to him. But if an adult gives something to, let's say, a 6-year-old child has enough knowledge to know the difference between a trinket of value to a pebble, so then the child has legally acquired that object, and no adult, even the person who gave the child the object, can demand that the child surrender it because it legally belongs to the child. And the Imrei Yaakov says, Zacha b'matana, v'im nasan lekatan hasamach al shulchan aviv, harei shel aviv. And comes along the Imrei Yaakov to quote this halacha that we just saw in Shulchan Aruch in the laws of lost objects. If, however, the adult gave a gift to a child who is a dependent of his parent, then that gift belongs to the parent. Aval, beven gadol hasamach al shulchan aviv, after mitziyaso la'aviv mikol makom b'matana zachaba. But if the gift was given to an adult child who's a dependent of his parent, so then even though in that situation the lost objects that adult child finds have to be surrendered to a parent, but this gift was given by a third-party adult and given to this adult child, the child is legally the owner. Because there the argument could be made that the gifter specifically wanted it to go to the child and not to the parent. But when an adult gives a gift to a minor who is a dependent on his parent, we can assume that the adult wanted the parent to be in charge of those assets to make sure that the child would use those assets responsibly, and therefore gave it to the child so that the parent would be able to be in control of that gift. So, like, there's multiple categories. Category of a toddler, then regardless of the parent's role in that child's life, that child does not acquire that gift halachically at all, and therefore anyone can take it away from the child, even the gifter himself. But if it's not the gifter, and it's a separate adult, so then we say because of Darkei Shalom, you can't take it away from a toddler because that's going to create strife within society. Once the child becomes over the age of cognizance, right, even though he's a minor, but he knows the difference between an object of value to an object of no value. So then if an adult gifts that child the object, the child now becomes the owner of the object, with the following exception: if the child is a dependent on his parent. In other words, you have a 6-year-old child, the child does not become the owner of the gift unless he's a dependent on a parent. If he's a dependent on a parent and he's over 6 years old, so then he must surrender that object to the parent if the parent so demands. And then then we're dealing with the bar mitzvah child. So if the gift is given to the child, but he's already legally an adult, so then the parent has no rights to that money and cannot demand that child to surrender the money. Now, I just remember my bar mitzvah. I got several hundreds of dollars in gifts. I don't remember how much it was, but my parents said that we're taking your money and putting it into an account for you to use when you're older. Now, did they have a right to do that if I would have given them a hard time? I didn't know any better. So I assumed that my parents had a right to do that. So I didn't fight because I didn't know the halacha. Had I known the halacha, that I have a right to demand that money be given to me, what would, but I'm grateful to my parents in retrospect, because if they would have told me, go ahead, son, it's your money, do with it as you wish, I would not have had that money once I had gotten into university and gotten married, when I really needed that money, and it had accrued interest by that time. And so I'm grateful to my parents. So there's nothing wrong with a little subterfuge sometimes. If you just tell your child, you know what, why don't you let us handle your assets? And we think that this is in your best interests. And the child starts giving you a hard time. You say, oh, all right, you know what? Well, this is what my parents did. We'll let you use 10% of your gifts and buy yourself whatever you want. How's that? Does that sound like a good deal? And then the child says, okay. So you're not deceiving the child, because you haven't told the child that they have no rights to that money. You're just telling the child what you're going to do with his or her money. If someone were to get a hold of that child's ear and tell them, take your parents to Beis Din so that you can get control of that money, Beitaka would have a case. They would have a case. Okay. All right. And final. So actually, I'm going to have to hold it here. We'll finish this tomorrow because I have to get going. All right. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
everyone have a great day.
Right, Rabbi. Take
Talk
care.
to you soon.